That day, the sun shone differently over that small faith community. The chairs had been arranged with simple flowers, but each one carried the weight of a story that few present knew in its entirety. A woman with dark hair, dressed in white for the second time in her life, walked toward the altar with tearful eyes. Beside her, a son who had grown up amid chaos and tears. And there at the front, in a simple suit with eyes shining with contained emotion, stood I, the same man she had asked to leave her life. The same man alcohol had destroyed. The same man God had rebuilt from zero. When the pastor asked if she accepted me again, Maria Adelina took a deep breath, looked at me, and said with a voice that was firm and yet broken with emotion, "Yes, this time with God's blessing." To understand what that yes meant, we need to go back in time. We need to go all the way to the beginning, to that marriage that started full of dreams and was slowly destroyed by an enemy that lives inside a bottle of Sergeant the chess. My name is Elias, and this is the hardest story I have ever told, but it is also the most important one, because if God restored me, He can restore anyone. Maria Adelina and I arrived in this country with little more than 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope. We were in our early 20s, newly married, ready to face whatever it took to build a better life far from the poverty we had known back home. Like so many who had made that same journey before us, we came with nothing but our willingness to work and a faith that God had led us here. I found work in construction. I was strong and willing, showed up before anyone else, and left after everyone had gone home. I learned English word by word on the job site, never complained about the cold winters or the long hours. I was exactly the kind of worker that foremen fought to keep on their crews. Maria Adelina worked cleaning houses and offices, sometimes starting before sunrise and finishing long after dark. We were building something. Every dollar saved was a brick in the life we were constructing together. We lived in a small apartment in a neighborhood where most families spoke the same language and missed the same distant country. On Sundays, we went to a small evangelical church led by a pastor who preached in the language we dreamed in at night. That community was our family in a country that was not yet truly ours. Our first son was born 2 years after we arrived. We named him Raphael. When I held my newborn son in my arms for the first time, tears filled my eyes, and I whispered as if in prayer, "I will take care of you. I promise." Life moved forward with its daily struggles, but there was peace. There was laughter at the dinner table. There was me coming home from work and lifting my son in the air. There was Maria Adelina humming while she washed the dishes. There was love. In the years that followed, a second son arrived. Vinicius was born on a rainy night and filled that small apartment with a new and happy sound. I played with both boys in the small backyard, made up stories before bedtime. I was the father I had promised to be. 20 years went by like that. Not perfect, but real. 20 years in which I had worked my way up on job sites, was now supervising crews. The pay had improved, and we had earned every single thing we owned with sweat and sacrifice. But it was precisely when everything seemed to be going well that the enemy came in through the back door. It was not sudden. It never is. Alcoholism rarely announces its arrival. It enters slowly, disguising itself as celebration, as relaxation, as just one beer after work with the guys on the crew. I started drinking socially, as I told myself. One beer here, one drink there, nothing that attracted attention. At least that is what I thought. Maria Adelina noticed before I did. I did not see the problem. The story I told myself was that of a tired man who deserved to relax. I worked hard, I supported the family, so one more glass hurt no one. That is the logic of addiction, which always begins with lies that seem reasonable. The Word of God says in Proverbs chapter 23, Do not look at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end it bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. How many families have been destroyed by something that entered smoothly, appearing harmless, and in the end stung with poison? That is exactly what happened in my home. As time went on, my absences increased. I started coming home late. Then I stopped coming home at all. The nights passed, then entire weekends. The money that used to support the family began to disappear. Maria Adelina discovered I had withdrawn part of the savings we had carefully set aside to one day buy our own home. Then came the news that I had missed several days at the job site. My foreman, who had been a loyal employer for over 15 years, called me aside and gave me one last chance. I promised. I went back to work for a while. I stopped drinking for a few weeks. But addiction has this quality. When it seems to have gone away, it is only waiting for the right moment to come back with greater force. Months later, I lost my job. That day was an earthquake in our home, not because of the loss of income alone, but because of what it meant. It was as if an entire wall had collapsed. I came home with red eyes, not from crying but from drinking. I sat on the couch and stayed silent for a long time, and then I left again. My sons, already teenagers, felt every tremor of that house. Raphael tried to protect his mother, placing himself between us when the arguments grew loud. Vinicius began to withdraw, started spending more time outside the house, avoided me. Maria Adelina prayed. She prayed every single day, kneeling beside our bed before the sun came up. She asked God for the man she had loved with all her heart to come back. I knew that. And even knowing it, I kept destroying everything. I started selling whatever I could find in the house, the television, the tools I had worked so hard to buy. Every item sold was another piece of the home I was erasing with my own hands. Maria Adelina took on extra cleaning jobs to keep the bills paid and our sons fed. She who had built so much alongside me now had to carry the family entirely alone because of my weakness. The most painful moment came in the middle of a cold night. I was so altered I barely knew where I was. I went to the kitchen and started going through the cabinets looking for something to sell or for hidden money. When Maria Adelina came to speak to me, I pushed her. It was not a deliberate act of violence, but it was real. And to this day, when I remember that moment, I carry a weight that no words can describe. She went to our son's room. Raphael was awake. He had heard everything. The two of them sat in silence in a pain that I had caused. That same week, Maria Adelina called an attorney. The divorce papers were filed on a Monday morning. She signed them with a trembling hand and dry eyes, because she had cried so much that the tears had dried up. When I received the divorce notification, the world collapsed on me. Even in the middle of my addiction, even having destroyed everything, a part of me had never believed she would actually leave. She always stayed. She always forgave. She always found one more chance to give. But not this time. I went to the house, tried to talk, tried to beg. Maria Adelina held firm, with a pain only she knew the size of. She told me she loved me. She told me this was not for lack of love. But she told me she could not continue, and she closed the door. I stood outside for a few minutes, not knowing where to go. Then I walked away. In the months that followed, I descended to what those who have been through addiction call the bottom of the pit. Without work, without my family, I ended up in a room I rented by the week in a part of the city I had never imagined living in. The little money I had left disappeared quickly. The bottle was the only constant. There were days I did not eat. There were days I woke up on the floor without knowing how I had gotten there. There were days I looked at my own reflection in the window glass and did not recognize the man I saw. My health began to fail. The body that had endured years of abuse began demanding payment. I became ill. First an infection that would not clear. Then other problems followed. I was weak, my face yellowed, my liver suffering in silence. It was in this condition that my mother found me. My mother, Dona Zelia, was 72 years old. A small woman with white hair and a faith the size of a mountain. She had prayed for me every single day of her life. When she heard through a relative that I was in bad shape, she did not think twice. She bought a bus ticket across the city, climbed 3 flights of stairs in that old building, and knocked on the door of my small room, and waited. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, I could not speak. She stepped inside, looked me in the eyes, and said with that calm voice that only she has, "I am here. And God is here too." I fell apart. I cried as I had not cried in years. I cried in the arms of my small mother, who smelled of soap and faith. I cried for Maria Adelina. I cried for my sons. I cried for the life I had destroyed with my own hands. And she stayed there, holding me, praying softly in my ear. She took me home with her that same afternoon. In the days that followed, she cared for me the way she had when I was a little boy. She tended to my food, my hygiene, my health. And every single day, without missing one, she invited me to come with her to the services at the Spanish-speaking evangelical church where she had found Jesus decades before. At first I refused. I was ashamed. I felt I did not deserve to walk into a place like that God had given up on me, that I had done too much to be forgiven. But my mother had an answer for every excuse. One day she said, "Son, Jesus did not go to the temple to look for the perfect ones. He went to the well to find the Samaritan woman. He went to the home of Zacchaeus the tax collector. He went to the side of the road to find the blind man who was crying out. He goes where the lost are, and you are lost, my son. That means he is looking for you right now." In the 3rd week, on a rainy Thursday night, I went with my mother to the service. I came in through the back, sat in the last chair near the exit, head bowed. I did not want to be seen. I did not want to be greeted. I just wanted to sit there in the dim light and see what happened. The preacher that night was a simple man with a firm voice who had nothing spectacular about his appearance. But when he opened the Bible and began to speak about the prodigal son, I felt as though the entire room had disappeared and those words were being spoken to me alone. He read from Luke chapter 15, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And then he said something that was engraved in my soul. The father did not wait for the son to arrive home. The father ran toward the son while he was still far away. That means God is not waiting for you to fix yourself before receiving you. He is already running in your direction right now. I felt something I cannot describe, a kind of warmth that started in my chest and moved downward. My eyes filled with tears. I tried to swallow, tried to hold them back, but I could not. There in the last chair of that simple room, in the back of the service I had entered with shame, I began to cry. And when the pastor gave the altar call at the end, asking who wanted to surrender their life to God, I could not stay in my seat. I stood up slowly, walked through the room with wet eyes, went forward without fully knowing what I was doing, only knowing that I had to go. The pastor placed his hands on my head and prayed. The entire congregation prayed together. My mother, seated in her pew, was on her knees with her hands raised to heaven, saying, "Thank you, Lord," over and over, her voice breaking with gratitude. That night something broke inside me, and something new began. The process was not easy. No one who has been consumed by addiction for years can expect liberation to be immediate and without struggle. There were days of crisis, of anxiety, of moments when my body demanded what my mind knew it must no longer have. I clung to that church community. I attended support groups, arrived early to help set up chairs, stayed late to pray with whoever needed it. At every moment of crisis, I prayed, I knelt on the floor of my mother's room and cried out to Jesus, not with beautiful words, with the raw words of someone desperate. Jesus, I cannot do this. I need you. Help me. And I can tell you that every time I prayed like that, something changed. Not always in a dramatic way. Sometimes it was only a peace that came slowly, like a light gradually filling a dark room. Weeks became months, months without drinking. The community helped me find a new job at a small construction company. Months of quiet rebuilding. And throughout that time, I began to pray for Maria Adelina and the boys. Every night, on my knees, I interceded for the family I had destroyed. I did not ask for them to come back. I asked God to watch over them, to provide for them, to do in their lives what I had failed to do while I was lost in addiction. The word says in Job chapter 42 that when Job prayed for the friends who had wounded him, God restored twice what he had lost. There is something powerful in the act of praying for those who hurt us and for those we have hurt. It is an act that breaks chains no human force can break. I did not know what was happening in Maria Adelina's life during that time. I found out later that she had sworn to herself she would not look back, that she had been strong enough to close that door and would not open it again. But it was my son, Raphael, who changed everything. One day he ran into me on the street, by chance, at a small grocery store near where he worked. We both stood still for a moment, not knowing what to say. I could see in his eyes everything I had caused. I did not defend myself. I just invited him for a coffee. We talked for almost an hour. I did not ask him to open the doors back. I did not ask him to carry any message to his mother. I just talked. I told him what had happened that night at the service. I told him about my mother's prayers. I told him about the silent battle I had fought against addiction and still fought every day. Raphael went home quietly, but I could see something had changed in him. I found out later that that same night he went to his mother's room and said, "Mom, I ran into Dad today." I found out that Maria Adelina slowly closed her Bible, looked at her son, and waited. And that when Raphael told her what he had seen, she stayed quiet for a long time, then opened her Bible to Psalm 126. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Weeks later, at her son's gentle insistence, Maria Adelina agreed to meet me one afternoon, not at home, at a cafe in a neutral space with Raphael present. She arrived with her heart deliberately closed. I understood completely. When she walked in, I stood up. I looked at her with eyes she had waited 20 years to see while I was drinking and had never seen. Clear eyes, present eyes, eyes that truly saw her. And I said only, "Thank you for coming. I know you did not owe me this." The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. I spoke about what had happened, about the bottom of the pit, about that night at the service, about the battle of addiction, about the prayers I had made for her and for the boys during all those months. She listened to everything in silence, with dry eyes and a closed posture. At the end, she said only, "I needed a long time to heal from everything that happened, and I do not know if I am fully healed yet." She paused, "But I hear what you are saying." We left separately that afternoon, but something had changed inside me, and I held on to that feeling as I held on to my faith. The meetings continued, first monthly, then every 2 weeks, with Raphael always present. I did not pressure, did not ask, did not take steps larger than the ones she signaled she was ready for. There was a patience in me that had never existed before, a patience that only comes from someone who has learned to wait on God. I found out later that one afternoon, without telling anyone, Maria Adelina went to my church community. She arrived alone, sat in the back, and watched. I did not know she was there. I was helping to arrange chairs for the evening service. She saw me greet a young man who had just arrived, putting my arm around his shoulder with genuine care. She saw me bow my head in prayer before the service began. She left before the service started. She sat on a bench outside the church for a long time. And she prayed. She asked God for clarity, for wisdom. She asked that if this was from Him, He would open the doors, and if it was not, He would close them all. Weeks later, she asked to meet me alone for the first time. When I arrived at the cafe and saw her sitting alone at the table, I stopped at the entrance for a moment, not knowing what it meant. She waited for me to sit. Then she said, with a voice she had prepared, but that still trembled, "I went to your church last week. I stayed for a while and watched." A pause that lasted an eternity. "You are not the same man I asked to leave my life." I needed a long time to believe that, but I believe it. I could not speak for a few moments. My eyes filled with tears I made no attempt to hide. She continued, "I do not know how it will be. I do not know if it will be easy, but I do not want to be afraid to try. Not when I have seen with my own eyes what God has done in you." We sat there talking for hours, about what had been lost, about the wounds that would still need time to heal, about the boys, but also about what could be rebuilt, about a grace that does not give up. Then I asked if she would agree to marry me again. Adelina looked at me for a long moment, and then, almost without meaning to, she smiled. A small, careful smile, but real. And she said, "On one condition, this time with God at the center, from the very beginning." I answered without hesitation, "That is exactly how I want it." The ceremony took place months later, simple as it had been the first time, in the hall of the faith community where I had been transformed. The same plain chairs, now decorated with modest flowers the congregation had brought with love. My mother was in the front row, wearing a floral dress, her eyes not stopping their flow of tears since she arrived. Raphael stood beside his mother, steady, holding back the pride of someone who had watched the battle up close and understood the value of that day. Vinicius, my younger son, had agreed to be present, and that yes from him was one of the most precious gifts of the entire day. The same pastor who had preached the prodigal son message the night I surrendered to God was there leading the ceremony. That was not coincidence. It was God closing a circle that only He could close. When the moment for the vows came, I held Maria Adelina's hands with the care of someone who knows the worth of what he is holding, and with a firm but emotional voice I said, "I wasted years that God had given me. I destroyed what you had built alongside me. And yet God had mercy on me, and you had the courage to believe in that mercy. I do not deserve another chance, but I receive it with gratitude, and I will honor every day God gives me by your side." Maria Adelina had not prepared what she was going to say. The words came from a place that is not rehearsed. With her eyes full of tears, she said, "I loved you for 20 years before all of this happened, and I learned that God's love does not give up. I do not want to give up on what God has not given up on. So yes, with God as my witness, with all this community as my witness, I accept." And when the pastor asked if she accepted me, she said the words that were engraved in the memory of everyone present, "This time with God's blessing." The entire congregation rose to their feet. The applause mixed with tears was the sound of something that goes beyond a ceremony. It was the sound of grace. It was the sound of a family that had been destroyed and was being rebuilt by the hands that create worlds from nothing. You who are listening to this story today may recognize in some part of it your own life. Perhaps you are like I was, the one who knows you have destroyed something precious and lives carrying the weight of what cannot be undone. Perhaps you are like Maria Adelina, the one who closed a door with good reason, who was strong when strength was needed, but who carries deep down a longing for what was and a hope for what could still be. Or perhaps you are like my son Raphael, who grew up watching everything fall apart and still refused to stop believing that God could put it all back together. The Word of God says in Joel chapter 2, "I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten." God does not only forgive, God restores. And what God restores is not a lesser version of what existed before. It is something new, built on a foundation that will not give way. I lost years to addiction, but what God did was not only remove the addiction from me, it was to transform a man. And the transformation of one man can transform an entire family. Perhaps you are facing something that seems impossible today. A broken marriage, an addiction that consumes, a family that seems lost forever. Perhaps you have prayed so much that heaven seems silent. The prodigal son in the parable did not wait for the father to come to him. He got up and went. The Bible says that when he was still a great way off, his father saw him. That means the father was watching. He was waiting. He was ready to run. God is watching you right now. It does not matter what you have done. It does not matter how much time has passed. It does not matter how many times you have promised and fallen back. What matters is that you get up, that you take that first step toward Him. If you are going through something like this, if you have someone like I was in your life, or if you are that person, I want to encourage you today. Pray. Cry out to Jesus, not with perfect words, with honest words, because He does not respond to ritual. He responds to the heart. And if this story has touched your heart today, if you believe that God still performs miracles, that He still restores families, still sets people free from addiction, still rebuilds what seemed impossible to rebuild, write in the comments right now, "I believe." Write, "I believe," if you trust that the God who restored me is the same God who can restore your life today. Because He is, yesterday, today, and forever, the same God, the same grace, the same miracle available for every heart that opens to receive it.